the statistics across the UK overseas territories and how they are impacted. So joining me this evening, on the line at the moment is the former Premier of Bermuda, the Honourable Michael Dunkley, who was Premier from 2014 to 2017. We also have, I should mention as well, Michael is Vice President and CEO of Dunkley's Dairy, a milk processing plant and one of the island's largest food importers. We also have the Footbot trustee with us this evening, Albert Poggio, honorary representative of Gibraltar for over 20 years and is a current trustee. Also in March 2015, Albert was awarded the Grassroots Diplomat Initiative for strengthening political and business ties for Gibraltarians and British citizens. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I want to start, if I may, with yourself, Michael. Can you tell us a bit about the Airlink from the UK, and is that providing any benefits to Bermuda?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on the call with you tonight, and it's great to catch up with some old friends. During these challenging times, I think these type of forums are really good, because one of the things that I think really weighs on people's minds and on their mood is, being shut up in home and not be able to communicate. So this gives a good, healthy opportunity to have some communication, to get rid of some fear, I guess, and to build some confidence in what we face ahead of us, and that's critically important. So in regards to the Airlink, I believe that it has served a purpose. Obviously, I think, like anything, there has been some slight pushback in Bermuda in this regard, because we are an isolated place like most of the overseas territories, and once we closed our borders down, people felt comfortable that we were keeping the virus out to some extent. And now with Airlink flights taking place, and we've had a number of British Airways flights, we've had some flights from the UK as well. I believe we might have had one from Canada. People are concerned that they're bringing in cases of the virus and that it could spread within our community. But the government has done a reasonable job in ensuring that that's not the case, because everyone who's come in has had to be quarantined and then tested before being released. I've always supported the government's stance that if Bermudians want to come home, we have to bring them home. Difficult challenge for every community, but I think we faced it quite well. And we have reacted very positively to a real difficult challenge.
Okay, interesting. And leading on to that, Michael, a question that one of our members, Greg Rodwell, wants to ask you has been, what has been the impact of COVID-19 specifically on Bermuda's insurance industry?
Good question. I guess you got to set the backdrop of the insurance industry that, Bermuda is, with New York and London, is the top three in insurance and reinsurance in the world. And I think we have weathered this pandemic as well as could be expected to this point. It really wasn't expected to hit the world like it did. We've seen what it's done to New York. I'm a little bit more removed from London, so I really can't comment on that. But the reinsurance business, generally in Bermuda, they started to take very serious steps, I would say, in the middle of March, to make sure they work from home. They closed their offices as much as they could. And so from that period to now, their business has gone on as usual. And this time of year is when they rewrite all their premiums. So they managed to do that. Now, in the long term, I think it would be a challenge for them like any other business, because I'm sure a lot of their clients are going to try to push back with claims in regards to what the pandemic has done. But we'll have to see. The reinsurance industry has been very proactive in general business through the years. They tend to prosper when chips are down, and I expect them to do the same at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. That's certainly interesting to hear what's going on initially with those. I want to just open things up a bit more. On the line, we're now joined by Andrew Rosendale MP. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Andrew.
See you all. Hello, everyone.
Andrew, how are you?
I'm
Best
good, thank
wishes from
you.
Bermuda.
How are you, Michael? Good to see you, Albert.
Wonderful. Nice to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, so thank you for joining as well. It's great to have you with us. So I just want to really ask a question towards Andrew at this point. So just a bit of context for those of you who do not know Andrew. Andrew's been the Member of Parliament for Romford since 2001. And he's current chair of the all-party parliamentary group for the British Overseas Territories, and for quite a few years now has been FOTBOT's parliamentary advisor. In a nutshell, Andrew is extremely knowledgeable when it comes to the overseas territories, and is a big fan of supporting the wider British family. So Andrew, in that spirit, what do you, the question we've had from Sarah Cooper is, what has the UK government been doing to support British overseas territories that you know of?
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for FOTBOT for organising this evening. I think it's really important that during this time we don't forget the overseas territories. I think we're all focusing on what's happening in our own communities and in the UK, and it's so easy just to forget that we've got a wider family to think about and look after. And today, in fact, I had a discussion with the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, Fabian Picardo, and I raised this issue with him about what the UK government is actually doing to support OTs during this period, and whether he's able to talk to other chief ministers and premiers in other overseas territories around the world. And the response was really disappointing, because he felt that we weren't working as a family. We're in a crisis, we're in a global crisis, and we each other, and he didn't think we were. Now, he didn't say that the British government were ignoring Gibraltar completely, but he is concerned about the problems that we're all going to face. And this is actually the very point where we should all be working as one British family. And he said he didn't think that was happening. So that worries me immensely.
Okay. And linking into that, another question we've had this time from Stephen is, how do you respond to criticism of the UK sending PPE equipment to places like St Helena, which I don't think has had any cases, or certainly hasn't had an outbreak yet?
Well, I don't think we can criticise the British government sending PPE to any overseas territory. You never know if a case may happen. I mean, St Helena is an extremely isolated place, and probably, if you know, one of the best places in the world to be at the moment is an isolated overseas territory where it's not likely that the virus will necessarily spread. Gibraltar, Bermuda, Cayman, and others are more populated and easier to get to. So, you know, I take the point, but if St Helena has some PPE in the event that there was an outbreak, then I think you can't really criticise that.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that, and I have to say that I was due to go to St Helena days before the lockdown started here in the UK. The Commonwealth Telecommunication was hosting a conference in St Helena for the first time. So I understand that the conference was postponed, and it would continue after the lockdown has been achieved. But in any event, I understand, been in contact with them during the lockdown, that they have got a number of cases, suspected cases of coronavirus. So I think it's only right that London should send them the PPE, just in case that the few cases that they've had all of a sudden became a serious problem.
Yeah,
it is also the responsibility of, as I see it, of the UK to look after its overseas territories. I mean, I know, Andrew, that you've spoken to Fabian today, but Fabian must have mentioned to you that we've had a lot of assistance from the military, from the RAF in bringing equipment to Gibraltar. You know, we've got a temporary hospital in Europa Point. And that's been achieved by the help of the military, and the RAF were very kindly brought some equipment to Gibraltar, vital equipment that was needed to make sure that this hospital will be functionable.
Yes,
I think, Philip, one of the things that needs to be recognized here is that this pandemic spread throughout the world very quickly and it strained resources, and PPE was one that I think every jurisdiction was trying to catch up on. So every decision that was made early on was questioned because everyone was trying to get the same thing. But now we've caught up, so there's no excuse for not using it in the appropriate way and helping our people.
Yeah, very, very well. Again, that's helpful because we don't often get the full news. Certainly, when it comes to the overseas territories, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, we normally get the shock headline and such and such. How dare we send X amount of PPE to a British overseas territory? Well, obviously the answer's in the next title. It's a British overseas territory.
We sent it to China.
Yeah.
Well, quite a bit of our PPE came in on the air bridge flights from the UK, which was very helpful.
Good to hear. Albert, I think I would like to bring you in a bit more now to the conversation. So on that note, so Albert, a question we've had from one of our good friends, Jasprit. How has COVID-19 affected the border between Gibraltar and Spain?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've got to say that all credit to Fabian and his team. I mean, he stepped up to the plate very, very early, in the very early stages, and thank God he's kept Gibraltar fairly safe. At the moment, we've only got 11 active cases. Most of them are isolation at home. We've had no death, and we've had no cases where hospital has been required. So, but of course, it's been a severe lockdown. The Spanish government, as you know, Spain has been very badly affected, and all borders have been closed, but except, of course, for the Gibraltar border. That has been remained open, and it's been very, very important for us because most of our health workers, or a large percentage of our health workers come across the border, and they've been able to come into work every day. So we are very, very grateful of it. But in terms of numbers, I mean, the border flow is something like about 7% of what the original number usually is. So we are grateful to the Spanish government for allowing that border to remain open.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting to hear that. Another question we've had as well, again from Greg, is this crisis likely to have any lasting changes to the relationship, Albert, between Gibraltar, Spain and the UK?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, certainly the way that the two governments have worked together through this pandemic has been very, very encouraging. I don't think that there is any change of attitude in respect of the Gibraltarians, how they feel about their nationality. So that was never going to come into play. One of the things that's happened between with the pandemic is that we seem to have put to one side Brexit. And of course, that is going to have to come into play. And we know that going forward in the transition period of Brexit, Gibraltar will feature very highly, and we have some very serious problems to overcome, and we need the goodwill of Spain to overcome them. But who knows how that's going to play out until we actually get to that particular point. The pandemic seems to have taken over, has put Brexit to one side. Yes, no, it has. Thank you, Albert, and perfect timing. Austin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. So Austin Harris is with us, who is not only, Austin is the current president of FOTBOT. Just a brief background on yourself, Austin. So before becoming an elected politician, Austin embraced a career in broadcast media. So I bet you're quite used to these situations, Austin.
Well, I'm certainly used to the interviewing situations, though the Zoom calls and whatnot are a relatively new aspect.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And then, of course, in 2017, Austin was elected to office, and afterwards was appointed by the Honourable Premier Alvin McLaughlin within the Ministry of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. So welcome again, Austin. Great to have you with us. We were just obviously discussing the situation. Now, one of the particular questions we've had from a colleague that you know well, Anya, is
Yes.
how are Canadians responding to not being able to visit beaches? That's the first question.
All right. Well, let me try to answer that as best I can. First of all, I want to say good evening to all of those who are tuned in. Thank you for this opportunity. Great opportunity to have this discussion with colleagues and friends. On your question of the closure of beaches, the closure of beaches also mean the closure of all water-related activity. And while the majority of the population, I think, understand and support the closure from the standpoint of limiting the spread of coronavirus, there are two distinct categories negatively impacted by this closure, and they fall into either one, the Caymanian fishermen category, or two, the expatriate or worker population. First, from the Caymanian fishermen perspective, there are many that earn their living from fishing, and while others depend on fishing to feed their family. As many will know, the Cayman Islands consist of 3 islands, namely Grand Cayman, and the 2 sister islands of Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. On the sister islands in particular, fishing is considered a religion, and therefore the closures put in place, the necessary closures regrettably, are not being received well by everyone. And we often hear complaints or read about them on social media. I think also, to add a little bit of insult to injury, the seas around our islands, both in April and in May, have been some of the calmest in recent history. And I think that only serves to further irritate our locals, that they cannot get out there and enjoy the fishing and undoubtedly the bounty that Mother Nature would otherwise provide them. So that is the first demographic. Second demographic, or foreign worker population. And again, here are persons who come to this jurisdiction mainly from colder climates. One of the big draws, if not rewards, of having the opportunity to live in the Cayman Islands is the opportunity to go to the beaches. And they too, in many cases, are not thrilled about the closure. Many believe they can maintain the social distancing necessary, but whilst we try to keep them open, and despite their best intentions, the beaches simply became too overcrowded and very difficult for our policing resources in order to cover. And ultimately, we had no other choice but to close it. So again, I think whilst the majority of the populace, and I mean the majority, understand the closure as being necessary to flatten the curve and hopefully remove coronavirus from our communities, it has not been without some pain.
Yep, very interesting. Just got a very, I think, topical question, just linking in slightly different angle though. So we've got a question from a long-standing FOTBOT member, Benicia Cox. And thank you for joining tonight, Benicia. So Benicia asks, this is to yourself, Michael, how would you describe the impact of mass testing on Bermuda's efforts? Some territories are not yet able to offer this.
A good question. And before I go there, let me just say hi to Austin and pass on our best to your Premier Alden from myself and my colleague Craig Cannonier. Had some fond memories of dealing with you guys, and I know Alden is working, communicating closely with our current Premier David Burt, so we appreciate that relationship. We took a slightly different approach in regard to our fishermen in Bermuda. We were basically closed down for the month of April, shelter in place. Only essential services and essential businesses were allowed out. The essential businesses were basically food suppliers. So fishermen were allowed to do what they had to do, were allowed to sell their product, and I think that was well met by our community. Like you, beaches were a real haven for challenges, so they were closed down, only opened up this weekend, and we had some isolated problems. Getting to mass testing, we have managed to catch up with getting the required supplies to do it. And credit has to be given to the government, because once we got the required supplies in to do it effectively, they've really stepped it up. So in the beginning, we had one lab in Bermuda with limited supplies, and basically, I think we were testing people that came forward through their doctor, and their doctors thought they had COVID. Since last week, we've had a drive-through testing facility in the east end of the island. You can make it by appointment, or you can just show up yourself, which has really ramped up testing. So we now have the capability to test large numbers every day. And as you can see, both Gibraltar, Cayman, and Bermuda have really seen their testing numbers rise, and they rank very favorably in the world. And I think this is a very important piece, because as we try to change the trajectory of our economies that the pandemic put it on, we need to have testing, we need to be able to contact trace, and we need to be able to isolate to start to open up our economy, which just this week, we've gone into phase 1, where more businesses are open up, such as construction and service companies. And so this mass testing is going to be critical for us going forward. And so far, touch wood and give blessings, our results over the past couple of days have been quite positive. Well, quite positive, I mean, been very negative, all negative results with very few positive tests. Maybe be clear on that.
Yep. Thank you for that, Michael. Another question back to you for yourself, Austin. What do you think COVID-19 means for Cayman's tourism industry?
Wow. Again, a very good question. Before I respond to that, let me likewise extend a warm hello to the Honourable Michael Dunkley, certainly on behalf of Premier. We chatted yesterday. I told him about this planned webinar. He expressed his fond memories of Michael, and on behalf of himself and of course the government, we certainly wish he and your family, everyone, well. On the question of the impact to tourism in the Cayman Islands, I think in a word, devastating. From the very start of this pandemic, the Premier set the tone for the government and largely the country, and that is that Cayman chooses life over economics. And that is with the goal to minimize the local spread of coronavirus. But we accepted from the very beginning that taking that course would create a number of challenges as a result of that decision. Now, whilst there aren't any significant empirical data since the onset of coronavirus, and certainly this is a learning exercise for all of us, but if we look at the numbers from the dates when our international borders were closed, we closed our seaports on the 16th of March, and we closed our airports on the 20th of March 2020. When we look at March 2020 total arrivals, they're down roughly 50% compared to the same period in 2019. They're down 100% April and May, simply on the basis we've had no tourism whatsoever. So what does this mean in real economic terms? Well, tourism accommodation properties would not have seen guests staying in rooms, dining on property, or partaking in any of the resort activities. Restaurants and bars, likewise, would not have seen guests dining or participating in libations. Public transport operators, whilst they are operating taxis right now, but to a maximum of 2 per person, they would not have seen passengers going to attractions like restaurants or some of the tourism attractions. This creates the knock-on effect of higher unemployment, followed by the need for government to increase its own expenditure to support the recovery of those most affected. So long story short, it has had a devastating impact on
Okay, thank you there, Austin. Quite a big question now, but sorry, I think it's signals a little bit.
The Honourable Mike Dunkley, that has led to us ability to in parts of domestic economy, and we too are in phase one of that exercise. We are very much, however, at the mercy of the success that other jurisdictions have in eliminating the virus, which will then give us the confidence necessary to reopen our borders to the larger, wider international economy.
Thank you.
Good point.
Yeah, and linking into that, I suppose, but this is really directed at Andrew Rosendale. Oliver has asked, Oliver Wilson, what lessons, if any, do you think the UK could learn from the approach the overseas territories are taking to COVID-19?
Well, I don't think we can answer that at this stage. I think that's something that will come out in future investigations when we assess how all of us handled this. Some countries around the world, and I'll give one example, which has done incredibly well and we can learn a lot from, is Taiwan. They have been amazing and they have really led the way on this. And I know Taiwan is nothing really to do with overseas territories, but my goodness, if any place deserves greater recognition after this, it's Taiwan. They actually sent us PPE, 1 million face masks as a gift from the Taiwanese government. So I think we can all learn from each other. Now, in terms of overseas territories, I've yet to really know how each territory has handled this. None of us really know. I'm encouraged to hear from Cayman and Bermuda today and Gibraltar as well, that things are going in the right direction. My long-term concern, really, as always, is if we can't come together as a family and help each other now, when can we do so? So I do worry about whether the UK government actually has a plan to be there for overseas territories if they need us in a situation like this. But we'll only know fully when this is over and everything has been properly investigated.
Okay.
Can I interrupt on the question of tourism? I think it's going to be a difficult task ahead for all of us. I mean, basically, Gibraltar, like many of the other OTs, depend very much on the cruising tourism. I mean, that's going to take a really long time before it comes back. Before it comes back to us, I think now the cruise companies are reevaluating the way that they sell their product. They're even reevaluating the size of the cruise liners. They're now thinking that perhaps cruising should be in smaller numbers, and rather than to increase the cruise ships to the level of the Royal Caribbean, 5,000 or 6,000 passengers in one go. The other thing that's very, very important, of course, is which is important for every territory, is how are we going to look after our guests? What plans have we got in place because we're going to live with this COVID-19 for a long time. Distancing is going to be a problem, which we're going to do. I mean, Spain, for instance, have now eased the restrictions, and they are allowing restaurants to open, but only to 50% capacity, so that they can allow for the distancing. So I think it's very important for territories to look at how they're going to sell themselves, how they're going to, what restrictions they're going to put in place, what safeguard they're going to put in place for their guests when they arrive. It's going to take a long time to bring the tourist industry back to the levels that we were before the COVID-19. And it's a question of, as far as we can, is working together as one family and, and helping one another. I gather today that there is the UK is planning a campaign. It's called something like in Great Britain, which will include the overseas territories. And already we've had to provide films of our territory for this campaign to take part. And I think I am informed that other overseas territories have already done that through their own tourist offices. So, there's got to be a joint, by the looks of it, a joint family get together in promoting our own territories.
Albert, can you answer me a question on that? Who's leading that campaign? Which department? And what is the campaign called again?
Well, I think it's called Great Britain campaign, which includes the overseas territories. I can give you more information on this, Andrew, tomorrow My daughter told me this today. My daughter is the chairperson of ANTOR, the Association of National Tourist Boards, of which all our OTs are members of. So I can get you more information on this, Andrew, tomorrow.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
We've had a really interesting question from Dr. Mark, and this is, I'll throw this open probably to yourself, to Austin first. What are your plans for the long-term support of to support mental health provision? So mental health is going to be a huge impact, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, panelists, on supporting mental health during this period.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If just before I address mental health, or if I could address the previous matter of the UK support, I want to say that from the Cayman Islands perspective, we've had tremendous UK Cayman collaboration and partnership, particularly through His Excellency the Governor, Martin Roper, and also through, I believe, the UK Ambassador to China, who helped us facilitate the arrival of a number of PPE for the coronavirus, which has not only benefited our local community, but has also enabled the Cayman Islands to provide assistance to other overseas territories. Likewise, there is a weekly, I think, air bridge between the Cayman Islands and the United Kingdom to facilitate the returning home of UK citizens and likewise of Caymanian citizens back and forth. So I think the relationship between ourselves and the mother country, if you will, has been excellent. And to my colleague's point, I believe the initiative was called Greater Britain, but it certainly builds on the capacity that Britain itself is powerful when united, but that is 10 times more so when we combine our resources of the overseas territories as well. So I think that is working well, and certainly to Andrew Rosendale's point, it may be too early to tell just yet, but so far I think we're off to a great start. Now on to the very important question of mental health. Certainly prior to the arrival of coronavirus, the Cayman Islands were in the process of building a purpose-built mental health facility. Because one of the big problems for us in this country is the number of available beds for persons who suffer from acute mental health problems that require medical care or further attention that perhaps surpasses that of what the family can provide. Certainly has posed a challenge in these pandemic weeks that of course has resulted in the increased need of government resources, which we rolled out both in terms of caseworkers, hotlines for things like depression and otherwise, which of course are heightened as a result of this stressful time. Certainly going forward, this is new territory. And the ability for a person who suffers from mental health to have access to a physician or otherwise in person may not be possible. Therefore, we are putting in place measures to better connect those patients with the physicians and caregivers so that we can address the needs, albeit in the absence of a physical building.
Philip?
Yeah, Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Let me jump in. I appreciate the answer from Austin. Very, very important issue. And I think in a lot of smaller communities, people tend to be very private about any health issues. Mental health, certainly one of those. And to the credit of our government, what we have tried to do as we've gone through this, we've sheltered in place for a long period of time. We've realized that domestic abuse cases will rise and mental health issues will certainly become more prevalent as people are in a confined setting. The future is very uncertain about things. The problems that they have weigh on them, and every day is the same type of thing. So government's been quite proactive in this regard. Is they set up hotlines where people can get access to calming voice and some direction pretty much 24 hours a day, which I think in the short term has helped people get over the divide. And as politics is very parochial in Bermuda as well, myself and a number of my colleagues, we've made sure that we have kept our phones buzzing, reaching out to our constituents, especially the older people, making sure that they have a voice to talk to. I make my phone calls normally in the afternoon or the early evening, and it's my best time of the day because the conversations are so heartening for the people that I'm talking to and myself as well. So these are the things, the challenges a small community faces. But once we appreciate the challenge, we rise to meet them. And I think it's been positive to see all the action groups taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. Albert, have you got anything to add on Gibraltar, support for mental health in Gibraltar?
I more or less concur with what Michael has said. We have a very caring community in Gibraltar, and we've turned our attention to our elderly population in a very, very positive way. We've had for a great number of years a very important charity in Gibraltar dealing with mental health, which is a charity supported by the government, and we seem to be able to offer what is required to make sure that people have the help at hand that might be needed during their close isolation.
Yeah, that's very helpful. A question that it's going to be a tricky one to answer, but I will ask it. How long do you expect lockdown measures to last?
Well, in Gibraltar, we've already started to unlock. I mean, our shops were actually opened on Saturday for the first time. Service companies started business today. Places like hairdressing, hair dry, barber shops and so on will be opening tomorrow. So what has been the impact on that is what's important. The social distancing has become a slight problem. People have gone to the beach because the weather has been, very, very warm. And it's easy to forget the social distancing. It's been a problem to us to the extent that the police have now closed the beaches in Gibraltar. We have to wait and see. I mean, what our health director of health has made a valuable comment. He said that in a population like Gibraltar, there are probably something like 3,000 people who are carriers and don't know that they are carriers. So now that we ease in the lockdown, we will have to wait a week to 10 days to see if there is an impact. And if there is, of course, then we have to go back to the total lockdown. But we've started to ease. There are more people coming across the border because the building trade has started operating again. So if I can just tell you that during the total lockdown, the border traffic went down to 7% of its normal capacity. This week it's gone up to 25%. But we just have to wait and see. The police are doing a great job in trying to keep the people, making sure that they observe the rules and the laws that are there. But it is difficult, and we just have to wait and see what the impact will have in the next 7 to 10 days.
Yeah, thank you, Albert.
If I could,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to certainly just add to what Albert mentioned as well. The Cayman Islands are likewise already beginning to open up certain sectors of our domestic economy. This past Monday, the 4th of May, an estimated 6,000 persons were allowed to be unlocked. These are businesses that either operate in the open air or represent small operators, things like the farmers market, commercial fishing boats, landscaping and gardeners, mobile car washing, pool service, which of course has been a major concern for a lot of people whose pools have been turning green, etc. So we have been experiencing some success as a result of our lockdown or curfew measures in flattening the curve, and that is giving us the confidence necessary to begin a phased approach at reopening our domestic economy. The next, I think the next phase 2, we're looking at about 2 weeks from now, the 18th of May, where we anticipate a further 7,500 persons will be removed out of lockdown. And then phase 3 will largely consist of the larger office buildings and whatnot. Obviously, all of this is entirely dependent on what the testing regimen is saying. As my colleagues will all certainly recognize, we operate in a very live, if not fluid environment where, these are our best guesses as a result of strategy, but that can change tomorrow if, 10, 15, 20, 30 cases come back confirmed. Obviously, that changes where we are in our approach. But as I said, trying to remain optimistic. The numbers are looking good as a result of the measures implemented. And like many of our colleagues, we are beginning the phase 1 approach of reopening.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what I said. We've also this week allowed for the over 70s to have 2 hours a day of freedom, if you like. And we've designated a number of areas where they can actually go for exercise, for a walk. So we've designated certain areas which will not be open to the rest of the population. They're strictly areas for the over 70s. And I think this has been very much welcomed by the over 70s.
Yeah.
And again, we have to see how things develop over the next sort of 7 to 10 days to see whether there is any increase on the virus.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is it interesting you mentioned now, but I'm just thinking in my head, Michael, about the long walk you can do in Bermuda along the old railway track. I imagine that's in high demand at the moment.
Well, as I mentioned, we just came out of our 4 weeks of shelter in place. Mm-hmm. And on the shelter in place, only essential businesses and services were open. But beaches, parks, and railway trails were closed. And we were only allowed I think it was a half an hour per day out within a half-mile radius of your home to exercise. Now we're in phase 1. So unlike the Cayman, we've gone to 4 phases coming back. Phase 1, beaches, parks, and golf courses, railway trails are open again, so you can go into those. Retail, restaurants are open for curbside and delivery. Construction, mechanical, and landscaping open. There's skeleton government crews that are open and limited public transportation and no gathering more than 10 people. We still have a curfew at night from 10 to 6 in the morning. Phase 2 will be retail establishments opening up, limited personal services, the same limited gatherings. Phase 3 will be school and childcare, full government opening, public transportation, the end of mandated work from home, because we still have the work from home that a lot of businesses can do. Churches and gyms will open in phase 3, and then phase 4, which is termed the new normal, allows for the airport to open up, full personal services, dine-in restaurants, bars and clubs, sports clubhouses. So all of that, as Austin has rightly said, depends on the progress we make. And so far, we were all hit by this and we were all very negative in the beginning, but I think optimism has to prevail now because we've gotten on top of this. Fear has been replaced by more certainty and knowing what we face, because we've learned from the rest of the world. And confidence is starting to build again because people do see a vision of a way forward. And that's the key for all of us, I think, as leaders in our community. We have to replace this fear with a vision for people to go forward, and then confidence returns. No matter how bad the current situation might be, we can turn it around and see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we're starting to see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And for those of our audience on the webinar tonight, based in the UK, we hope to get those kind of details on Sunday. We're expecting the Prime Minister to lay out the roadmap. Yeah, I think it's just really detail is missing from the UK road to recovery. But so yeah, I mean, really interesting to hear how Bermuda's planning to hit each stage. I'm just going to ask Lucia if you has got the next question. So Lucia is the event secretary of FOTBOT. So if you want to come off mute, Lucia, and just I think you've chosen a question you want to ask the panelists.
Hi, Philip. Thank you. Hi, all. This is a question that's been submitted in the Q&A section, which we'd encourage all participants, if you'd like to, drop your question there. It's specifically, I'd recommend it for Albert, but they have actually said what all the panel think about what do they think is the right amount of measured support for independent firms who may be seeing their advertising revenue drop markedly, specifically in terms of local media, for example. In the overseas territories, this is often a valuable part of helping to bond communities. So what do we think is the measured amount of support those independent firms should receive during this time?
Well, Gibraltar is committed to help all the businesses up until the end of May, and then the situation will be reviewed. It's very difficult to predict how we can move forward with this because we don't know what the outcome will be or when the end will really come. So businesses have suffered. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it is a total disaster. We need to get them back on track. And you talk about the media, the others, they have a very important role to play as we move forward, and they would need supporting. But I said that the decision for that has not yet been made, and it would need to be reviewed, and certainly need to be reviewed beyond the end of May, because I don't think that the situation at the end of May is going to be any much different to what it is today. So we've got to look at it long term, but it certainly needs a support to maintain that kind of industry going.
Okay. Any thoughts, Michael or Austin, Andrew?
No, I agree with Albert. It's very difficult. Everything in life is under pressure right now. But certainly as a politician, you have your ups and downs with the media as you go through your daily cycle in politics. But we've seen now here in Bermuda, with this pandemic crisis that we're facing, that the media has really helped tremendously in disseminating information, and that's been key. So I think we have to work with them. And in small communities, there are larger pressures on them because the media base is not as large as it used to be, because everyone has access to Twitter now, their access to Instagram and Facebook, so they get away from watching the daily news on TV. So the media have to find a way to reinvent themselves to keep getting the information out there and to be relevant. And I think some of them have seen opportunities in these difficult times. Let me just segue off real quick before we go back to Austin. I see former Governor George Ferguson is on our link here, and I want to say hi to my good friend. He asked a question about private jets. The government in Bermuda has been very resourceful in that. Obviously, we have private jets like every community fly in and out. With our international business, it tends to be a bit more than normal for a small size place like this. But what the government has done is that we're controlling the airport. No flights are allowed to come in unless given permission. But anyone bringing a private jet in has to ensure when they come or go, they take Bermudians as needed. I think that is an excellent bridge to take advantage of, and so far so good. We've seen it be used for good purposes, and I appreciate the understanding by the companies who have those jets, but also for the government for allowing that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. Austin?
Yeah, no, first of all, to Michael's point, I think he makes an excellent one. Likewise, here in the Cayman Islands, we have a number of our resident population who have homes here, who also, obviously, their means of travel are private jets. Our airports have been closed to all incoming flights. Certainly, any resident who has a private plane and wishes to leave may leave based on various government authorities or whatnot. I know a number of those private residents have participated in the sourcing of PPEs and other necessary equipment, so we're grateful for them. But certainly we have the benefit not only of the air bridge between the Cayman Islands and the United Kingdom through British Airways, but the added benefit of a national flag carrier, Cayman Airways, which has also been able to facilitate a number of departure flights. We have a number of residents that were stuck here because their home airports like India and Honduras and otherwise have been closed. As these places reopen, certainly the national flag carrier has been beneficial at returning some of these residents home, those who wish to go. So it's been a very positive working collaboration. Just going back to the point that Albert and others made as it relates to the media, so I think Michael made an excellent point in that the media in these times have proven to be our friend. Certainly to most politicians, in normal times, they would not necessarily say that. But in these times, the media has definitely proven to be our friend from the standpoint of disseminating information. And for a while there, certainly at least through the course of the last 6 or 7 weeks, it hasn't been politics as usual. There's been a bit of a pause in politics as usual, with a broader recognition that we're all in the same boat together. This is about life and preserving life. So there's no room for politics. And that's been, I think, a bit refreshing, albeit that we're starting to see gradually partisanship, starting to, filter back into normal life. So politics is in fact coming back slowly but surely. But also in terms of informing the public in the Cayman Islands context, the Honorable Premier, followed by the Minister of Health, His Excellency the Governor, and the Chief Medical Officer have been engaging in daily press briefings for the past 7 weeks. So that too has been an important mechanism to keeping our populace informed and aware of what is happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a specific question back to Andrew. Andrew, Oliver asks, are you confident the UK government is giving enough attention to the overseas territories during this crisis?
No, not at all. I'm reassured to hear from Austin that the UK government have been helpful. Fabian Picardo today said the UK government have been helpful. My fear, as always, is that when things go wrong, when there's a crisis, when something has to happen, the overseas territories are too often an afterthought. Now, in the case of Cayman, Bermuda and Gibraltar, they are almost completely able to deal with things themselves because they are territories that have had years of establishing their own structures and mechanisms to do things. But I really think that this is a pivotal moment in terms of how Britain looks at its overseas territories. Are they really fully part of our British family and should be fully included in everything, or are they something separate and different? And we talked about the media a moment ago, and I think to myself, years gone by, the BBC would have been pivotal in promoting information and disseminating knowledge about what's happening. I wonder how powerful the BBC is these days in terms of being, the British voice, and is that being listened to in the overseas territories like it would have been years ago? Of course, local media is the most important in these situations, but I think there's a lot of lessons going to come out of this, and I think that some positive outcomes could result from this in terms of how we not only modernize the relationships with the overseas territories, which I don't think that process has been completed yet, but also how we ensure that people understand that overseas territories are British. They're part of our family. We have a duty towards them that we sometimes forget. And, it starts, at the top in Parliament, in government, civil servants and ministers who a lot of the time don't really understand the importance of the overseas territories and how they fit within the British family. So it goes back to the same issue that I often talk about, is how do we ensure that going forward, assuming that all the OTs are going to stay as British territories and they aren't going to leave the family, that we need a much more long-term, permanent way of dealing with them and including them, rather than them being an afterthought, which I'm afraid is so often the case.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrew. That's really interesting to hear. I do want to just ask, before I ask the next question, I do want to just welcome, I believe we've got Ian Paisley MP on the call as well. So thank you for joining, Ian. He's a very big supporter of the overseas territories with yourself, Andrew.
Ian has sent me a message. I don't think he can speak on this. Can he speak, or is there anyone else that can speak?
He might be able to, not this moment in time. I will see if I can figure that out.
Well, he sent me a message, Philip, and there's quite an important point he's making, that he heard what we were talking about. Albert mentioned about, this Great Britain campaign. I suspect it's similar to the Department of International Trade and the Britain is Great type thing. Of course, Great Britain is only England, Scotland and Wales. It's not Northern Ireland, and it's not the Crown Dependencies, and it's not the overseas territories. If it's great with a small g, we're great and we're British, fine, I get that. But unfortunately, too often when we talk about Great Britain, we are only talking about the mainland, as it were, the England, Scotland, Wales. And I think it sends out a very wrong message. And I think it excludes overseas territories, Crown Dependencies, and particularly this is felt in Northern Ireland. And Ian has just actually sent me a message to tell me that. And you know, we've really got to make sure that the whole of the British family feels included in any kind of campaign going forward.
Absolutely.
Well, and this is where you, Andrew, are playing a very important part, and some of your colleagues. There's always going to be a wider picture. I mean, I can go back from history in my time as a UK representative back to Lady Thatcher, who was a great friend of yours, and she was a great friend of mine. And I remember when she had the opportunity to resolve the issue of Gibraltar for once and for all, which was at the time that Spain was joining applying to join the common market, as it was then. And I asked her why she didn't play the ace that she was holding, and she was very adamant. She said, well, look, you know, I had to look at the wider picture. And the wider picture in that case was, of course, that by allowing Spain to join the common market, it more or less guaranteed democracy in Spain. So there's always going to be a wider picture. And the wider picture sometimes is controlled, as you know, Andrew, by the civil servants, not necessarily the politicians. So it requires people like you and other parliamentarians to be there, to bring the subject of the overseas territories to the floor of the House as often as you possibly can, so that the OTs are not forgotten, that we are part of that great family. When the UK joined the common market, or the European Union, Gibraltar was often left out of the laws. And I remember in those days, which was my role to tackle the issues, the answer was very simple. The civil servants who were writing up the laws had forgotten or didn't know that we had all these overseas territories. So, you know, you are playing a very vital role.
Sorry, apologies. We are limited, unfortunately, for time, and I just want to fit in a few more questions, if that's okay. And so thank you. It's really good to have this conversation, and the points are making. I mean, we've had over 40 questions, so it's fantastic. So the next question I do want to ask, because I think it is a good, very interesting question, and it comes from Lord Ashcroft, who's on the line as well.
Yeah, I saw it.
The Caribbean territories and Bermuda rely on US tourists. The virus will be in the USA for a long time. How do you open your borders, and with what protocol? So really, Austin and Michael.
Certainly, to Lord Ashcroft's question, I think he's absolutely correct. I mean, right now, our airports and cruise ports, for that matter, are closed up until the 31st of May. But there's a very strong likelihood that that's going to be extended, possibly for the rest of the summer, possibly into the early winter. You know, if I can answer that question personally, given that our major trading partner is the United States from tourism, and we see how, I think, and not, I have to be careful when I say this not to put too sharp a point on it, but I think in many respects, the US has given us an example of what not to do in this coronavirus in many respects. And as a result of that problem, obviously that extends the period upon which we anticipate we can open up our international borders. I believe personally that it'll be December, maybe even January 2021 before we can open our borders to US travelers. Again, as I said earlier on, we are at the mercy of what other jurisdictions are doing to control the spread of coronavirus in their own jurisdictions. That would in turn give us the confidence necessary that we too can open our borders without inviting, you know, a resurgence, if you will, of the virus.
Yeah, Philip, I think Austin has made very valid points, and I just would like to piggyback on that and I'll say it this way: we need to replace confusion with some certainty about where we're going. Why do I say that? Because when this pandemic started spreading around the world, an interesting stat that I saw the other day, in February, there were 2 million visitors left Europe to go to the United States, into New York City. That was spreading the virus. So as the virus spread throughout the world, there was confusion of what to do. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure we test. And I believe that innovation is going to start to really show the steam that it's building up to allow testing along the antibody line to show that communities can, once they show they flatten the curve and pretty much deaden the spread of the virus, to show that they can keep it that way, that we can test using antibodies to ensure that people leaving your jurisdiction for one place are clean at that point, and people coming back past that antibody test. That's the way of the world for the foreseeable future. And I believe that innovation across the world is going to make that happen much quicker than all the prognosticators have said over the past couple of months. And it won't be long before these antibody tests are something that people are doing on a regular basis, and allows you to open up business, allows you to open up borders, and have some confidence in where you're going in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Another question, Lucia, I think you've got the next question again. Sorry to pick on you, but
no problem. Hi all. It's a question we've had in the Q&A section, but I think I'll rephrase it just because I think then we can open it up for wider discussion. Have we had any collaboration between the bots in relation to the crisis?
Albert?
Or collaborating with their neighbours?
Yes, I think as a short answer, you know, we've here in the Cayman Islands, we've had collaboration with Bermuda. We've had collaboration, I think, with St. Lucia. We've had collaboration with Belize in Central America. And we've also had ongoing collaboration with Jamaica, particularly as it relates to when they will be opening their borders, because we have a number of their own citizens living here that are anxious to get back home. But certainly, I think in the broader question, there has been, and that's encouraging, there has been ongoing collaboration and open talks between the British Overseas Territories and its closest neighbors, certainly in the Cayman Islands context.
Albert, has there been any other collaboration apart from with the UK and where necessary with Spain for Gibraltar?
Well, there has been, I mean, there's been a lot of cooperation with Spain, as I mentioned before. I mean, Spain has a lockdown was quite severe, and it closed all its borders, but yet it kept the Gibraltar border open. And for us, that was a blessing because we were able to rely on our health workers, which come across the border. So there has been, and of course, there's been a lot of consultation with London. And as I mentioned before at the very beginning, when it was decided to establish this temporary hospital, the RAF stepped in to bring out the vital equipment for this hospital. Also on the question of medical stuff, you know, like respirators and so on, we've relied very much on the RAF. Gibraltar depends very much on airlines like EasyJet, which of course are not flying. We now have a bridge with British Airways, which is, I think, is a three times a week, and the only reason that they are flying there is because we are supporting them. You know, as a government. So yes, we've had lots of consultation with London, and certainly a lot of consultation with our neighbours.
Thank you.
But bearing in mind, of course, that under normal circumstances, there will be 15,000 workers coming across our border.
Yes.
So a lot of people on the other side of the border rely on Gibraltar for their living.
Yeah, it must be quite surreal, Albert, seeing that, seeing the border. Was it empty? You know, just. Is it just
it's
really
empty at the moment in comparison to what it normally is? And of course, one of the things that's happened in Gibraltar is the Clean Air Act. I mean, Fabian Picardo yesterday in his statement has now looking ahead to the end of the lockdown and how to maintain the clean air that we're now experiencing. And he's already indicated that certain roads will be closed in the future, because obviously the cars are partly to blame, or hugely to blame for the ozone that we have. So that's a good side to what's going on with the COVID-19.
Yeah. I will take just 2 more questions, because I think if that's okay with the panel, is Mike, is everyone okay for another 10-15 minutes?
Certainly.
Thank you, folks, because we are officially actually out of time, but I think I'm getting so many questions. I don't want to let obviously try and ask as many as possible. And the next question has come from one of our big supporters, so Elizabeth Anderson, who's the Deputy CEO of Fotbot. She'd like to ask, can you give us one positive example, in your view, of where the crisis has brought your local community together? So Andrew, perhaps like in Romford, has there been any particular example you'd highlight of where, amongst all this depression, it's sad, obviously stressful situation and crisis, where the community has actually come together, in your view?
Yeah, well, I think there are lots and lots of examples, and where it's shown mostly is through voluntary and community organisations that their functions are sort of stopped. Churches have stopped. Community groups don't meet anymore, but their members are still communicating with each other and offering help not only to their own people but also on a wider level. So as an MP, I'm getting literally more emails and more messages from constituents I've ever had. The entire day, they're coming through the whole time, and they range from all sorts of people, from people stranded abroad that need to get back home, to businesses that are in dire straits. But then also you have people that live locally who are locked indoors, they're vulnerable, they can't get their shopping, and they actually email me and say, look, we need help. And I'm forwarding those on to church groups and community groups to get them to go and help. And indeed, even my secretary, who works in Margaret Thatcher House in Romford, she's been out buying shopping for people and taking PPE to care homes. It really has brought the community together. And, what I've said to some people is that just, this is not a time for politics. This is a time to think about us as a family, both at community level, but also in this context, throughout the world. British people throughout the world need to stand together and work together to get through this. We will get through it. We do have the bulldog spirit, don't we, Albert? We haven't lost that.
We haven't lost it at all.
We haven't lost that. And, we're going to have a great celebration this Friday for VE as well. Let's not stop celebrating all the great things about our country.
Yeah.
Michael, the community in Bermuda, have you, in your constituency, has anything particular been worth highlighting?
Yeah, I again will piggyback on what Andrew said. In my time in politics, just over 20 years now, this period has been the busiest period for messages that I've received from constituents and all across the island. Bearing in mind, I used to be the Premier and the Minister of National Security, so even this time is trumping that. And the good thing is that when you reach out in Bermuda, there are people who will help. And I'll just mention 2 things, because I think Andrew gave a good overview, and I'm sure the others can as well. The government has done a good job right from the get-go of making sure we took care of the homeless. So a homeless shelter was opened up, and that's still in place now. So those street people who, by and large, many of them are down on their luck, and some want to be in that type of environment, but need some help, we're taken care of, and that was tremendous. But our helping organizations, those people who are struggling, the government set up an unemployment benefit for people who are laid off, which has been, I think, really well received. But there are still many people who are falling through the cracks. There's still many people who are struggling. We have seen so many people rally together, from businesses to churches, through Meals on Wheels, serving the community with meals every day. And I know, my colleague, Craig Kennedy, the former Premier, now opposition leader, he delivers meals every day that's made up by a church in I think my constituency. So the community has come together, and I think that's what happens in most communities, but certainly in small, isolated communities, it doesn't take much for people to forget about themselves for a while and look broader throughout your community and take care of people. And it's really gratifying. It fills up your tank every night when you go to bed, realizing that there are people there, there are people going to help.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Albert, any things you want to mention from Gibraltar?
Well, I mean, I agree totally with what's been said. I mean, we have a very close community in Gibraltar. Everybody's involved. There's no one that's not doing something for the community, either by entertaining in the evenings, isolating, but yet entertaining. Certainly the keeping in touch with the family, which is easy for a small place like Gibraltar. Let me just tell you, I'm in London. I'm isolated here in London. And I had a phone call from the care agency in Gibraltar to ask me whether I was okay and whether I needed any food delivered. And I obviously said yes, but it hasn't arrived. But it just shows you the care, how the community has come together. And the number of people, the number of friends, some of them friends that I don't even haven't spoken to for years, all of a sudden they're sending messages to me, are you okay? Where I live here in London, we have a WhatsApp for the local community. All of a sudden, I know all my neighbours, which I didn't know before. So it's something good that's come out of this this tragic COVID-19.
Yeah. And Austin?
Yeah, I would have to definitely concur with all of my colleagues and what their sentiments, particularly from a smaller community standpoint. The Cayman Islands, we haven't seen this kind of camaraderie, I think, since September 2004, when we all suffered from Hurricane Ivan. A different event, but certainly when we are all in the same boat, people tend to pull together. Certainly the government has led admirably. I think we put in place things like unemployment support. We put in place assistance for small and micro-sized businesses, including better financial planning, as well as access to, operational loans from banks to obviously bring down their rates a little bit, understanding the challenges that businesses are feeling. But certainly from the human element, whether it be Meals on Wheels, Feed Our Future, the churches or otherwise, because when, COVID first arrived on the shores, at the time, there was a belief that they would impact our elderly most severely. And therefore, I think the community sort of ring-fenced itself around our elderly community, our mothers, our fathers, those in the rest homes and whatnot, whether it be, daily calls, whether it be people offering to do grocery shopping for them, whether it be persons wanting to make sure to listen, I've made some homemade face masks. Can I deliver them to you and your family? So, it is events like this, as difficult as they may be, and make no bones about it, it is a difficult time, but it is certainly difficult times that personally renew my faith in humanity.
Good point.
Yeah, very good point. So I just one last question, and I'm going to be selfish. It's for myself, but it does. It's directly on behalf of all our listeners this evening. If there is one thing each of you would ask or could ask those of us are based perhaps not in Bermuda or not in an overseas territory, so really the UK and such, what can we do, if anything, to help? Is there a particular charity you just want to give a shout out for, or some support, or a particular church even, or just how can we, is there anything we can do as individuals to really support the UK overseas territories?
Well, my dear friends, if I can just be bold enough to be first, I think, as I mentioned before, we've had great support, not only from our existing close neighbors and vice versa, our support for them, likewise the ongoing collaboration and support from the United Kingdom, as well as the other countries, whether in the Caribbean or the wider world in which our residents live in. Obviously, we have direct relationships with the ambassadors of various countries, caring for their individual citizens. I think it's difficult to ask, what can you do? I think really it's just keep us in your prayers. But that goes for all of us, Bermuda, Gibraltar, the Cayman Islands, the UK, It's just this belief that it is a difficult time. Who would have thunk it that a flu would have shut down a world economy? But it has happened, and we are all in the exact same boat together. It may be bigger. The challenges may be harder based on our economies, our population, etc. But the challenges that we're facing and the actions and strategies we need to implement, they are just eerily similar. So I would say keep us all in your prayers and believe in the higher power that we too shall get through this storm as well.
Yeah, I must say, Austin, I think a big thing that we do benefit from the UK is that the weather here does keep us indoors a lot of the time. So, and I think me and Andrew will be certainly looking at giving 16 prayers tonight, because there are 16 overseas territories, if I can say that. So absolutely, and you are in my prayers all the time. I'll just ask, I think, Andrew, do you want to go next? If there's anything you want to wrap up on, and anything you think we can do as individuals?
Well, I don't want to single out any particular overseas territory for support, because I think that during this period we need to support wherever the help is most needed. But I think that as individuals, you have to look to your own communities at this time. Community is everything when there's some crisis happening, and we've all been through some dreadful, certainly the overseas territories have been through a number of crisis periods with the hurricane, volcano, whatever it might be. And I just hope that in this crisis, which is affecting all of us, that we will all do everything we can to help the people that most need it, because I think that life will never quite be the same again after this. It will be different. And I think that this is the time when humanity really must show its better side. To some extent, you look back to, early this year, last year, we've become a bit spoilt. We've taken everything for granted. And I think that, we need to think about things afresh, and how we behave now and what we do to help our nearest and dearest in our communities actually is going to form a foundation for how we carry on in the future.
Yeah. Albert, anything, last words from yourself, Albert, this evening?
Well, I concur with everything that's been said. I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, you can't, you've asked a question what you can do. Certainly you cannot identify one particular charity. I think all charities are going to go through some very troublesome times, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities later on to choose how you can help these charities. But for the time being, as an association, the best thing that you can do is to deliver the message from these territories to the wider audience. There is a lot of good coming out from all of us, and I think it's a vital role for FOTPOT to deliver that message, and to specifically here in the UK, to make people understand that there are 16 overseas territories which are British overseas territories, and that's a role that FOTPOT has to play.
Thank you.
Let me just end up by telling you, when I had a very troublesome time with Mr. Blair, when he tried to share the sovereignty of Gibraltar, very quickly, I held a survey outside my office in the Strand in London, and a simple question: can you name, how many overseas territories, British overseas territories, can you name? And at the time, of course, the first one was Gibraltar, because we were very much in the news. The Falklands, because of the war, and then after that, it was and this is this is the way that life is here in the UK. People need to learn that they've got 16 British overseas territories.
Absolutely. Thank you, Albert. And I'm going to leave from the panel, Michael.
Thank you. Very insightful comments by colleagues. Let me finish off here in two ways. One, directly to FOTPOT. I think you've done great work today, because when we're challenged, leadership has to rise to the top to get through these things. And part of what is required in a challenge with leadership is to mobilize others in pursuit of a better future for all of us. So by this forum today, you've mobilized people to come together, and the people on this group, the participants, those people on your Facebook page, probably have not heard of the panelists have been here, or if they have, not to a large extent.
Yep.
And so we all share the same problems because history repeats itself if we allow it to, good and bad, right? And so here we are, we face a pandemic that has gripped the world, that's created fear, and we have two issues. We have an immediate issue of protecting our people, staying healthy, protecting our vulnerable, finding a way through it, which now I think we're on more solid ground of understanding the course we're taking. But secondly, and just as importantly, as was said earlier, I think Austin said it, is a really delicate balance between the health of our people and growing our economies. But we have to find a way to slowly open our communities up, to rebuild our economies, to bring those jobs back, and to solidify our public purses, which are under a great strain. So these type of communications allow all of us to live and learn, because I want to work for history repeating itself in a positive way. I want to learn from our mistakes. And today we set a foundation that allows us to build on that. So thank you for what you've done.
Yes.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. And thank you very much. All that's really left for me to say, I just want to, I should mention obviously that tonight, thanks to all our listeners, we have actually raised, each year Footbot supports a specific cause, and this year we've been supporting the Falkland Islands Museum, who are looking to extend their collection in the Falkland Islands. And a big shout out to we've got 2 listeners from the Falklands and to other overseas territories, and an apology that we haven't obviously been able to have a panelist representing each OT tonight, but I hope you'll all appreciate we wanted to try and obviously keep it manageable. And if we do another COVID call, which is very possible, we will look at providing a platform to those territories that would like to take part. So we've raised £120 through donations for specifically from this call tonight. So that's fun. We didn't expect to raise anything, if I'm honest. So thank you so much to everyone who's contributed, and a huge thank you to Michael, Albert, our President Austin, and our Parliamentary Advisor Andrew Rosendale, and obviously Albert, as I mentioned, is our trustee. Our next event, we're doing a quiz in 2 weeks, just something more lighthearted. I hope you'll all forgive me, but we're going to get off the topic of COVID-19 for a little bit and 2 weeks, and we're doing a fun quiz just to test it. Well, linking into your point, Albert, we want to really test people's knowledge on the overseas territories. So we look forward to running that.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, as Michael quite rightly pointed out, I truly want to extend my sincere thanks and congratulations to Fotbot, to yourself, the members who, work diligently to create forums like this one. I think I read a quote somewhere, it says that anyone can lead while a plan is working, but the best lead when a plan falls apart. And certainly I think that can be said of yourself and all of the hardworking volunteers and individuals of Fotbot, reminding the world that, there are 16 overseas territories as part of the greater family of Britain, and we are all in this together. So I want to thank you for facilitating this conversation, and I want to extend, again, my heartfelt thanks to all of my colleagues who I had the pleasure of chatting with this afternoon with.
Thank you, Austin. And on that note, I just want to say, please do, ladies and gentlemen, listeners tonight, please, obviously, my plea is join Fotbot if you're not already a member. And yes, I mean, we obviously take our subject matter very seriously, and even if we can, I often say this, I think the day that the British Virgin Islands is no longer considered an American overseas territories by the vast majority of the UK population will be a great step forward, because it does happen, I'm afraid. Well, on that note, really good to talk to you all. Please keep in touch, family. We need to continue supporting one another. Thank you again to everyone who's taken time out this evening, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from most of you, if not all of you, again in 2 weeks if you want to join our quiz. We've got a few good prizes as well. So on that note, I'll leave it there. Good evening, everyone, from the United Kingdom, and good night.
Good night. Stay well.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.